Treehouse of Horror 32 is pretty fabulous and also pretty special because in this episode we have more stories than we usually get in a Treehouse of Horror. This is the third episode of the 33rd season of The Simpsons, directed by Matthew Faughnan, and as always I will go through the various segments and give some thoughts, things I liked, things I didn't. I didn't like one of them, and I didn't think another one was as good as it could be. But generally, I'd say this was a pretty decent Treehouse of Horror, so there will be spoilers from this point on. And the first segment, the opening, is a segment called Barti, which is, it actually made me, it made me laugh out loud at one point. So as I said, there are spoilers. I will also be discussing things that I found particularly funny. And this is a parody of Bambi. And it's actually horrible, but there's a bit where Marge, who's Barti's mother, comes along and says there's a hunter in the forest, and Milhouse, who is Thumper, asks what's a hunter, and a second later his head's blown off and then his foot's blown off. If that was a live action or even, heavily CGI'd realistic, I'd have been traumatized. But because it was just little Milhouse Bunny, there was just something about the timing of it that was so funny. It's quite a brief parody. I think they could have done a little bit more with it, but at the same time, we do have 5 stories in a 23-minute episode. So it wasn't too bad. The second one I didn't really like very much, and this is Bong Joon-ho's This Side of Parasite. And this is, of course, a parody of Parasite, which I definitely don't rate as highly as a lot of people. And I think part of the reason why I didn't like it was because I was just not that bothered about the story. And I also felt it was a little bit slow, though. I felt the pacing was really slow. It took a long point to get to anything even remotely interesting. It started to get interesting, or at least more interesting for me, when Kirk Van Houten came into the story and kind of how he drove the narrative forward a little bit. But up until that point, I feel like it was very slow. And they could have extended Barti and made the side of Parasite shorter, and that might have worked a little bit better. Honestly, I didn't care for it. I didn't hate it as such, but it wasn't for me. The third one is very self-aware. This is Nightmare on Elm Tree. Now, I'll be honest, I was hoping for a Nightmare on Elm Street parody, but that's not what we get. It's just using the parody in the name. And Homer said he's sick of the scary stories at Halloween, so he's going to chop down the treehouse where Bart's telling scary stories. And he makes reference to the fact that there are 3 stories every year and he's chopping this tree down. And of course, that's kind of symbolic because they've chopped up the usual structure of an opening and then 3 stories. And they've just gone in with 5 parodies, or a couple of parodies and some, Nightmare on Elm Tree. And I thought it was pretty awesome. I didn't love the direction it took after that point, I'll be honest. I didn't think it was as good as it could have been. It was quite well written and very well animated, but it wasn't as fun or as fascinating as I'd hoped for. But I still thought it was pretty okay. The fourth one, and I have to say this is a very quick one, and I did kind of wonder when I realised that this was going to have more segments in it before I started watching it, and I did wonder about the pacing. Would they all be the same length, or would there be some that are shorter? Poetic Interlude, aka the Telltale Bart, is very short, but it works quite well. We have the character of Vincent Price. Reading the story of the Telltale Bart, Vincent Price is voiced by Maurice LaMarche, and the animation is in the style of Edward Gorey, and I love this animation style. This artwork style is absolutely stunning. I absolutely adored it. And we have this poem that's all about the months of the year and different things that happen. Obviously everything with a horror twist or a gory twist, gory in the creepy sense rather than the Edward Gorey sense. But I absolutely adored the poem. I adored the animation style. It is short. It is brief. I would have liked it to have been longer for personal preference, but actually as a self-contained little segment, it really, really worked and I really enjoyed it. The fifth and final story is actually my favourite. I'll rank them all in a moment, but my favourite is definitely Dead Ringer. and this is a parody of The Ring, which I love. And this is very much in the 21st century because there is a TikTok video that will result in your death if you watch it. You'll die 7 days later, and we see various characters dying in very creative ways, and then Lisa decides to take on the character, the girl in the well. It's very much similar to The Ring in a lot of ways. It's a very strong parody, and Lisa decides to take her on, and it's, well, what happens I thought was really fun. Beautifully animated. Absolutely love seeing The Ring in the Simpsons style. It's wonderful. Really thoroughly enjoyed it. So if I had to rank them, I'd go Dead Ringer, Poetic Interlude, Barti, Nightmare on Elm Tree, and then the side of Parasite. Honestly, it's not too bad. On the one hand, I'm saying it's great that we have 5 different stories, 5 segments, but at the same time, I only really liked 3 of them. So I guess the odds are in my favour that I'm going to at least like 3 of them now, hopefully. I honestly don't know if they keep this up. I haven't looked ahead. But I like the idea of having more Treehouse of Horror segments within an episode. This proves that it can be done. And I'm very keen to see what happens with the next ones. Treehouse of Horror 32 is generally really delightful, and for the most part, one I really thoroughly enjoyed.